You pay your bills on time. You don't buy things you can't afford. You show up, you do the work, you don't complain about it. And if someone asked you, um, are you responsible with money? You'd probably say yes, maybe with a small hesitation, but yes. And yet there's this feeling, this low-grade hum in the background that doesn't go away. Not panic, not crisis, just this sense that you're doing everything right and somehow not getting anywhere. Or like you're treading water in a pool that should have a shallow end, but every time you reach for the wall, it moves. You're not in debt. You're not reckless. You're responsible. And somehow that makes this feeling harder to name because you can't point to the mistake. You're not sure there is one. That's exactly what I want to talk about today. Because the financial mistake I'm describing isn't dramatic. It doesn't show up on a credit report. It doesn't have a name that most people know. But it might be the single most common reason that genuinely responsible people stay financially stuck. Not because of what they do wrong, but because of something they never do at all. The conventional story about financial struggle goes something like this. People spend too much, save too little, make impulsive decisions, and lack discipline. And sure, that story is true for some people, but it doesn't describe you. It doesn't describe most of the people I'm thinking about right now. The people I'm thinking about have discipline, they have budgets, or at least a general sense of where the money goes. They feel guilty about unnecessary purchases. They put something aside when they can. By every standard metric, they are doing the responsible thing. So why does the conventional story keep getting told? Because it's easy. And it turns a complex psychological pattern into a morality tale. You know, you overspent because you lacked willpower. You're struggling because you made bad choices. And the solution then is simple. Make better choices. Be more disciplined. Try harder. But here's what that story completely misses. There's a researcher named Shlomo Benartzi who has spent years studying why people don't save enough. Not irresponsible people, but ordinary, well-intentioned people who fully intend to save more and simply never do. And what he found wasn't a discipline problem. It was a timing problem. Specifically, it was what behavioral economists call present bias. The very well-documented tendency of the human brain to overvalue what's available right now and dramatically undervalue what's available later. This isn't a character flaw. This is how your brain was built over hundreds of thousands of years in an environment where later didn't always arrive. If there was food now, you ate it now. If there was rest now, you took it now. The brain that prioritized immediate reward over future reward survived. The brain that said, I'll eat this later, sometimes didn't. You know, that brain is your brain, and it's completely healthy. But it's operating inside an economic system that requires you to make long-term decisions with short-term discomfort, consistently, reliably, for decades. And it was never designed to do that naturally. The responsible person's mistake isn't spending too much. It's believing that their good intentions are enough to overcome a psychological force they can't actually feel in the moment it's working against them. Let me take you somewhere specific. It's the end of the month. You've covered your rent. You've paid your subscriptions. You've put some gas in the car. You're looking at what's left. And maybe it's $200, maybe it's $600, and you think, I should save some of this, and then something small happens. Your friend texts about dinner, or your phone bill is slightly higher than expected, or you're just tired. And buying that thing you've been looking at for 3 weeks suddenly feels like the only reward you've allowed yourself in a long time, and you spend it, or most of it, not recklessly, not impulsively, really. In just the moment passed and the brain did what brains do. Next month, same thing. The intentions are still there. The savings are still not. Here's what's actually happening beneath that moment, and it goes deeper than present bias. Yes, there's a concept in psychology called ego depletion. The idea, studied extensively by Roy Baumeister, that willpower is a finite resource. Like, every decision you make throughout the day draws from the same cognitive pool. Every time you said no to something at work, every time you held your tongue in a difficult conversation, every time you chose the salad, every time you pushed through the fatigue, all of it spent something. By the end of the day or the end of the month, the pool is low. And financial decisions are the decisions you almost always make when the pool is at its lowest point. You don't sit down to review your finances at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, feeling rested and clear-headed. You do it on Sunday night after a full week, when what you really want is for everything to just be fine. So the responsible person isn't failing because they lack values. They're failing because they're fighting two psychological forces simultaneously. Present bias pulling them toward now, and ego depletion stripping them of the cognitive resources to resist it. And they're doing it at the exact moment when both forces are at their strongest. That's not a character problem, that's a structural one. Now, here's the layer underneath that, and this is the one that I think explains why this particular mistake goes unnoticed for so long. Most responsible people have a complicated relationship with what I'd call financial deserving. There's a quiet internal narrative, not always conscious, but almost always present, that goes something like this. I work hard, I do the right things, therefore I deserve to have this feel easier than it does. And when it doesn't feel easier, when the money still doesn't seem to grow, when the savings account stays flat month after month, something happens psychologically. A kind of quiet resignation sets in. Not depression, not hopelessness, but just a very subtle, very gradual lowering of expectation. You stop imagining a different financial future, not because you've given up dramatically, but because every month of treading water quietly teaches your brain that this is what reality looks like. Psychologists call this learned helplessness, a term coined by Martin Seligman in the 1960s, after observing that animals exposed to repeated, uncontrollable events eventually stopped trying to escape them, even when escape became possible. Responsible people develop a financial version of this. They keep doing the responsible things, paying bills, avoiding debt, but they stop expecting that doing those things could lead somewhere different. The goal quietly shifts from building to maintaining, and maintaining doesn't require a strategy. It just requires endurance. And endurance, it turns out, is exhausting and expensive. Not in money, but in psychological weight. The low-grade hum I mentioned at the beginning, the feeling of doing everything right and going nowhere. And that feeling isn't just frustrating, it's a signal. It's the sound of a strategy that was designed for survival, not growth. And, your brain knows the difference. Even when you can't articulate it. Here's the reframe I want to offer, and I want to be precise about it because vague reframes don't actually help anyone. The mistake most responsible people make is not a spending mistake, it's a design mistake. Specifically, it's designing a financial life around intention instead of around reality. Intention says, I'll save what's left over. Reality says there's almost never anything left over, because the brain is biologically oriented towards spending available resources now. Intention says, I'll make better decisions when things calm down. Reality says things don't calm down, and the decision point is exactly where the brain is least equipped to choose long term. The shift isn't from irresponsible to responsible. You're already responsible. The shift is from intention dependent to structure dependent, and this changes the question you're asking yourself. Instead of asking, why can't I stick to this? Which is a question about your character. You start asking, where in this system is the moment of decision and how do I eliminate it? That's a question about design. And design problems have design solutions. This isn't about removing yourself from the equation. It's about understanding that the most financially successful people aren't the ones with the most discipline. They're the ones who've built systems that require the least discipline because they understand deeply that relying on willpower at the moment of temptation is the weakest possible strategy. So what does this actually look like in practice? And I want to be careful here because I'm not going to hand you a generic list. Everything I'm about to say follows directly from what we just established about how your brain actually works. We established that the moment of decision is where you reliably lose, not because you're weak, but because of present bias and depleted cognitive resources. So the first structural shift is to automate the decision out of existence. Not to save what's left over, but to move money before your brain ever registers it as available. Automatic transfer on payday, even if it's $50. The amount matters less than the structure, because the structure removes the decision point entirely, and we've just seen that the decision point is where the biology always wins. Now, we established that responsible people develop a form of learned helplessness, a quiet contraction of financial expectation that slowly removes the motivation to build anything. The antidote to learned helplessness, Seligman also found, is small, visible wins, not grand gestures, not big launches, tiny proofs that your actions are connected to outcomes. So the second shift is to make your savings account visible in a way that shows movement. A separate account with a specific name, not savings, but something that represents what it's actually for. Something that makes the connection between your action and a real future tangible. The brain needs to see causality to stay engaged. And the third, this is the one most people skip. We established that responsible people often mistake maintenance for a strategy, but maintenance is the absence of a strategy. And the brain knows it, which is why the low-grade anxiety never fully goes away. The shift here is to give the financial system you're building a purpose that connects to identity, not just numbers, not, I want to save more. So that's an instruction. But what is the version of my life I actually want require me to believe about money that I don't currently believe? That's a harder question. It might take a week to answer honestly. But it changes what you're working toward, and working towards something specific is metabolically different from enduring something indefinite. I want to leave you with something that I think is worth sitting with. You've probably spent a long time measuring your financial health by what you haven't done wrong. No debt, no impulsive mistakes, no recklessness. And that's real. That matters. But it's also a defensive posture. It's a financial life built around avoiding failure. And avoiding failure, it turns out, is not the same thing as building something. The quiet financial mistake most responsible people make isn't a moment. It's a posture. It's standing guard over what you have, expending enormous psychological energy to maintain it, and calling that responsibility. Responsibility is part of it. But it was never supposed to be the whole thing. The people I respect most financially, not the richest ones, but the ones who actually seem at peace with how they relate to money, they're not more disciplined. They're more honest. You're honest about where their brain reliably fails them, and they've built their life around that honesty rather than against it. Yeah, that's available to you. Not because you'll suddenly become someone different, but because you were never actually the problem to begin with. And we talked today about how responsible people often confuse maintaining with building, and how that quiet shift in expectation shapes everything. But there's another layer to this, because the reason most people never revise their expectation upward isn't just psychology, it's the specific story they've inherited about what someone like them is supposed to have, where that story comes from, and how invisibly it runs. Sort of is what the next video is about.